Labour Party Chair and Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities is Anneliese Dodds. Good to see you this morning. In terms of China, how much a threat do you think China is now to our country? Liz Truss has said they're untrustworthy. Rishi Sunak has described them as a threat. Yet we're now seeing the Foreign Secretary visiting. What is Labour's policy towards China?
Good morning. Well, we feel we need to have a far more strategic approach towards China. The Chinese leadership always take a long-term approach when it comes to their interests. But as a country, over the last 13 years, we've really not had a strategic approach towards China. If, for example, could look at what took place with Huawei, with the different elements of critical infrastructure within the UK, where we've had really big chops and changes under the Conservatives in terms of approach. Instead, Labour says we need to have a longer term approach to this. Of course, there are threats there. Ultimately, there are issues around values very clearly when it comes to human rights, but also making sure that we protect our trading interests as well going forwards. And that's why we need to have that longer term approach. And that's what David Lammy has been setting out as Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary.
So you would be happily, David Lammy would be going on this visit if Labour were in power?
Well, we believe there needs to be engagement, but it can't be ad hoc. It can't be operating in the way that we've seen over recent years. As I said, when we've not had a joined up strategy, for example, just a few years ago, it was actually the Conservatives arguing that there should be far, far lower trade barriers when it came to Chinese goods, etc., and Chinese trade. Now, there was a problem with that because there wasn't a level playing field all of the time. And Labour said at that time, we need to have that more joined up strategic approach because, as I said, the Chinese regime has a long-term approach to policy making, to trading issues. The kind of chop and change that we've seen over recent years has done our country no favours. And it's really important that we put our best foot forward, especially when we've had, for example, when it comes to economic growth, really sluggish economic growth over the last 13 years.
Labour today is announcing plans to protect women's rights on equal pay. Why do you think that is now at risk?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen women's incomes going down actually over the last 13 years. Women now, on average, £574 less well off in real terms than they were in 2010. And the gender pay gap actually increased last year. So we need to ensure that women's rights to equal pay are protected. Now, unless we have the protection that Labour is saying we need to continue having in place, actually companies or organisations could just restructure. They could outsource in order to wriggle out of their equal pay obligations. Now, that's really bad for, in particular, low paid women, but it's bad for the whole workforce, quite frankly. It could lead to really complicated organisational structures just to, as I say, wriggle out of equal pay obligations. This is important. It's important for those low paid women, and it's important for our economy as well, because those low paid women, of course, very often will spend a large proportion of their income. They have to. It's going directly back into the economy. And the fact that, this appears to be or was under threat really from the Conservatives moving away from it, I think just indicates they've got the wrong priorities.
Well, you say it's under threat, but the current government says that this law that was an EU law is simply going to be reintroduced by them. They say there's no threat at all of there being a rowing back on equal pay rights.
They have as of last night. Of course, I welcome that. But until now, it looked like we were going to be seeing that back shifting. Of course, another U-turn from the government here is welcome, but I'm afraid there's much more action that they need to be taking to ensure that we genuinely have equal pay and that women's incomes do actually move forward. As I said, we've been slipping behind many other countries when it comes to our incomes on average, and we would like to see much more action from government to improve that.
The government also yesterday launched a plan to try to kickstart house building by relaxing rules about waterway pollution. They hope it's going to allow 100,000 homes to be built over the next 7 years. We clearly need those homes in the UK, don't we? Do you welcome that announcement?
Well, we'll look very carefully at the detail of it, which has only again come out late last night. But this is in the context of a crisis in house building. We've got the lowest levels of house building now since the Second World War. and a crisis of sewage in our rivers. And Labour's called on government to take action. Actually, the factor that has enabled that precipitous fall in house building has been the Conservatives moving away from their target on house building. All the experts have said that is what is to blame for that huge fall in house building. Government action has led to that fall. But of course, they've also refused to take action when it comes to sewage in our rivers. They've refused to, for example, say every sewage outflow needs to be monitored and that there should be automatic fines. So we really need to see proper action on this. And I'm afraid the government's announcement last night just doesn't seem yet to have the detail necessary, but it's also not going to face up to those big challenges.
So would Labour reverse this decision and reinstate this requirement? Because otherwise you're effectively agreeing with it.
Well, we do think there needs to be reform in this area, but the detail obviously hasn't completely been released. In fact, their amendments only came out late last night, so we're looking in detail at them to understand their implications. But I think the suggestion from government in particular that this is going to really turn around house building is frankly laughable. As I said, the main factor that most experts in this area say has led to the huge fall in house building has been that scrapping of the target by government. And Labour said that we would reverse that scrapping of the target because it's really clear that the evidence indicates that that is responsible for that huge fall off in house building.
Final quick question for you. The ULEZ was expanded yesterday in the London area. Big rows within Labour itself about this. Suggestions from some that Keir Starmer asked Sadiq Khan to delay the rollout. Is Labour still the party of green policies if you can't all agree on this?
Well, we absolutely are. And we're all agreed that you need to have, obviously, policies that are pro-environment and policies that are in favour of increasing people's incomes and combating the cost of living crisis. And I think mayors like Sadiq Khan were put in a very difficult position by the Conservative government. Of course, the Conservatives required local authorities to implement charging schemes. They've said that's the only way to go. But in London's case, they didn't provide the resources to implement the kind of very wide-ranging scrappage scheme that the mayor wanted. Of course, he has expanded it as much as he possibly could. And I think that's the difference between Labour and the Conservatives on this. We believe that with pro-environment policies, you can and should reduce costs for families. That's why our energy policies, for example, would really be pulling those energy bills right down. Big difference compared to the Conservatives' approach on this, where there seems to be purely stick and no carrot.
Okay, Anneliese Dodds, Shadow Secretary State for Women and Equalities. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.